Hey guys, it's Miss Bobby. I hope you guys are doing great. It's been a whole week since we talked again last. Can you believe it? Last week, whenever we talked, it was Easter Sunday. I know that Easter was a little bit different for a lot of us. A lot of us are used to going to church, and taking pictures in our fancy clothes, and then maybe going to eat at Grandma or Grandpa's, and or maybe to our own house. We were used to going to see family and getting to eat ham and all of the goodies, pie, all of those good things with them. So I know that Easter was a little bit different this year, but I hope you guys still had a great Sunday. I hope you had a great week. It's been chilly and it's been rainy and yucky this week. I know my family's kind of sick of sitting inside too. But this next week looks better. It looks like it's going to get warmer. Maybe we'll get to have some bonfires outside with our families and that kind of thing. So I hope that you guys have had a great week. As I was thinking about our last few weeks, and probably the last like 4 to 6 weeks, some of us 7 or 8 weeks, from the time that we've been inside, and I know a lot of you guys have heard a lot of talk about the virus that's going around and people getting sick and that kind of thing, and it can be scary, right? And then just the fact that we're not at school anymore. School is done for the rest of it's closed down for the rest of the school year. We're doing school online. We don't get to see our friends right now. We don't get to see our teacher. We're out of our routine. Those things can be a little scary. And so as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the story of Daniel. You guys know we've talked about Daniel before, but I wanted to read you guys the story because some people may not remember the story very well. So I wanted to read you guys the story of Daniel and the scary sleepover out of the Jesus Storybook Bible, and then we'll talk about it a little bit afterwards, okay? So here's the book. This is our families. If you don't have this book, I highly recommend it. Our family still uses it for devotions on occasion, and along with some other resources, but this one is amazing, even for older kids. There's older kids that love it. And this story is called, I don't know if you guys can see it very well, Daniel and the Scary Sleepover. And this is taken from Daniel 6, Daniel chapter 6. Things were not looking good for God's people. They had been captured and taken far from home, and now they were slaves of the king of Babylon. But God had not left his people. He was with them, and he was looking after them. Daniel loved God and obeyed him. Now God made Daniel able to understand lots of difficult things. So it wasn't long before the king of Babylon noticed him. King Darius liked how clever Daniel was. So he made Daniel the most important helper of all, and put him in charge of lots of other people. But the others didn't like this. They were jealous. They wanted the king to like them best. They wanted to get rid of Daniel. So they spied on Daniel. They tried to find things wrong with Daniel, things they could tell the king, but there weren't any. None. They couldn't find anything at all, except there was just the one thing. Every day, 3 times a day, without fail, no matter what, Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. They smiled to themselves. Ha! Let's get the king to make a law. No one is allowed to pray to anyone except the king. Daniel won't obey this law, and he will be punished. They were pleased with themselves for being so clever, and they hurried off to tell the king. The king liked their idea. He didn't know they were tricking him, so he made it into a law. Everyone must pray only to me. If they don't, the lions will have them for their dinner. Daniel heard this. He knew it was wrong to pray to anyone except God. He had to do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. So Daniel went to his room, he closed the door, and he prayed. That's just what the bad men knew that Daniel would do. They skipped straight off to tell the king. Oh, your most glittering highness, your law says, does it not, that everyone must pray to you alone, sire? Yes, said the king. Oh, magisterial brightness, then correct us if we're wrong, but it would seem that Daniel is praying to God and not to you. The king was sad. He had been tricked. He didn't want to hurt Daniel, but he couldn't change his law, and so he let the soldiers throw Daniel into the lions. May your God, who loves you so much, rescue you, the king said. The king loved Daniel. The king went back to his palace, but he didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. He tossed and he turned until finally, at the first glimmer of dawn, he leaped out of bed and ran straight to the den. "Daniel," he cried, "has your God rescued you?" "Yes," Daniel shouted. "God sent an angel to close the lions' mouths." And there, resting his head on Daniel's lap, was the biggest lion, purring like a little kitten. The king brought Daniel out of the den. "Look," he said, "Daniel doesn't even have a scratch." The king made a new law. Daniel's God is the true God, the God who rescues. Pray to him instead. God would keep on rescuing his people, and the time was coming when God would send another brave hero like Daniel, who would love God and do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. And together they would pull off the greatest rescue the world has ever known. So I was thinking about the story, and I was thinking about how scary that night must have been for Daniel. So we know that Daniel was a man who loved God very much. He prayed to God 3 times a day, no matter what. And these guys that were jealous of Daniel, said, "We got to get rid of him. The king likes him better than us. He's going to get all the jobs that we want. He's gonna make all the money. The king loves him more than us. It's time to get rid of him." And so the only thing they could find out that he did was pray to God 3 times a day. And we know that that's not wrong. We know that it's okay, that we should pray to God, right? So they went to the king and they said, "Hey, listen, this guy is off his rockers. He's kind of crazy. And he prays to God 3 times a day. And correct us if we're wrong, but we think that people should be praying only to you. You're the king, right? So Daniel should only be talking to you. He should only be praying to you. So maybe make it a law." And they didn't tell him it was about Daniel. Maybe just make it a law that maybe you should only let people pray to you. None of this praying to God stuff. And so the king, without realizing that it was Daniel that they were trying to trick, the king went ahead and made it a law. And so these guys then started spying on, looking around the corners and waiting for Daniel, because he would pray. I'm sure he prayed out loud, and they were waiting for Daniel to start praying. And the second that he did, they went running to the king and they tattled on him. And so the king had already signed a law, and he knew that he had been tricked, but there wasn't anything that he could do about it. And so even though he loved Daniel, and it broke his heart because Daniel was his right-hand man, Daniel was his best buddy as far as work goes, and so he knew that he had been tricked, and he was heartbroken, but there wasn't anything that he could do about it. And so he had Daniel thrown into the lion's den, and he said to him, "May your God save you." And that night must have been scary. Can you imagine being thrown into a pit of lions? I'm sure the lions, they've said before that the lions were very hungry, and it was usually a very bad thing whenever somebody was thrown into a pit of lions. Nobody survived anything like that. And so I'm sure the king thought for sure, outside of a miracle of God, that Daniel would not make it. And he was sad. And so all night long, Daniel spent time in this lion's den. It must have been scary. I can't imagine. Have you ever gone to the zoo? I know that we've gone to the zoo before, and we've heard the lions roaring. It seems like especially whenever it's time for them to eat and they're hungry. And it's kind of like when our tummies start growling and we start getting hungry. That's exactly what was happening with Daniel and the lions. And I'm sure that they were hungry, and I'm sure that he was afraid. He knew what lions did. But God intervened. God loved Daniel very much, and God intervened, and God sent an angel. The story tells us that God sent an angel, and the angel closed the mouths of the lions, and they didn't touch Daniel. He didn't even have a scratch on him. And the next morning, the king woke up, went running to the den, and looked in and saw that Daniel was okay. And he was so thankful. And that taught the king a lesson. That taught the king that God was the one true God. And so thinking about our last few weeks, there have been times, it seems like news is getting a little bit better now and things are getting a little bit happier. But there have been some times in the last few weeks that things have been kind of scary. You may have noticed that your mom and dad were a little bit nervous or a little bit tense, and some of our parents were laid off of work, and so they're at home now, and we're no longer able to play with our friends and that kind of thing. But I want just to remind you guys that if God can take and shut the mouths of the lions to where they didn't hurt Daniel, And if Daniel could spend all night long in the lion's den, God can still protect us. God is still just as powerful today as he was back then. And so I want to remind you guys that even when things look scary, even when things seem impossible, even when life seems overwhelming, that God hasn't left us. God didn't leave Daniel in the lion's den by himself. God was still right there with him. So today the younger kids are going to learn a story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were three young boys that were told not to, they were told that they were to bow down to an idol, but they refused to because they knew that they were only to worship God. So they were thrown into a furnace of fire. And the Bible tells us so that they weren't burned up. You guys know how fast, like if you hold the kids got to see a marshmallow, I think, getting burned up. And we know how fast that happens. If we have a bonfire and we hold a marshmallow over it, how fast it can catch fire. These guys weren't even touched. They didn't even smell like smoke when they came out because God walked through it with them. And we know the same thing happens with us, just like with Daniel, just like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God doesn't leave us. God's right there with us. He's right there with us to protect us, and he never leaves us alone. Even when things look scary, even if it's a scary long night, God never leaves us. And even when this is all over and we're able to be with our friends again and life is back to normal, there's still going to be scary things, right? We're still going to come across scary things in life. And we can always, always remember that God never leaves us. God loves us, and he walks through those things with us. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I hope that you get to enjoy some of the warm weather. I'm planning on our family doing some bonfires and roasting marshmallows. I bought some stuff for s'mores. So I'm planning on getting outside and enjoying the warmer weather and the sunshine. It's chilly out here, and it's windy today. But I hope that you guys have a great day. I hope you have a wonderful week. I look forward to talking to you guys next week. We're this much closer to seeing each other again. I love you. Talk to you later.